Khenpo Sodargye.Udāna Sūtra Dakar ngam santo shirmer do tomba tuji chanla ki shom sar nechan ro cherni jangam sa jagur tuji shanla yela jime benzo jala soran de gonte toban bor shinji lo.
The supreme, profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it, may we realize the Tathagata's meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us all sincerely give rise to the unsurpassed and supreme bodhicitta. We will continue our discussion on the profound Udāna Sūtra. Everyone is currently diligently studying the Udāna Sūtra. For those who are truly studying it properly, they are still quite diligent at their daily tasks. On one hand, there are some traditional commentaries written in Tibetan. They have been diligently following these detailed commentaries as well. If there are no commentaries available, I also sincerely hope everyone will actively consult all relevant scholarly materials and traditional sources. When teaching any important Dharma text, one should, during this period, as much as possible, read it repeatedly and carefully cross-reference it again and again. Start with the literal meaning, then for each verse, analyze carefully what the main central idea it conveys is, and systematically use many such proven analytical methods for comprehensive analysis. Actually, for us, even if it is just one single class, I personally think this is extremely precious. The chance to attend even a single class is something I value, as it can offer us important insights for growth. So now, there are some people, only a small portion of Tibetan people actually have the chance or opportunity to listen in person. However, even though a few individuals are not physically present, I think that by relying on various modern, convenient technological methods and platforms, they can still hear the Dharma teachings just the same way. If one studies in such a diligent and focused manner, in fact, one should also receive exactly the same profound blessings and the very same valuable learning opportunities. Of course, whether one can truly receive the transmission, there are various opinions on this matter. But as for this transmission, actually, on one hand, if you are going to teach others, it is very important. If you are not going to teach others, I think for your own understanding, it is fine not to have it. Especially for exoteric teachings, it is fine not to have it. So there is really no need for everyone to start worrying about this matter for the time being. You should just study as well as you can yourself. Some great masters of the past, when they received the Dharma, actually did not have the true authentic transmission either. But they were still able to practice effectively on their own initiative. This includes the great Venerable Jigme Lingpa, who also, in a pure vision, received threefold guidance from Venerable Longchenpa. He obtained this Dharma and was able to practice it himself personally. Similarly, this also applies to Khenpo Acho, who also received many teachings in pure visions, but later was able to practice them himself. He was fully able to attain realization. He just did not transmit them to others. So I think this time can also be considered an opportunity. Some people study very diligently, consistently from beginning to end, while others are constantly distracted by all kinds of worldly distractions, unlike being peacefully on the mountain or among the supportive monastic community. So I feel that some dedicated people love to study seriously, some are able to persevere steadily, while some, when they encounter even a small obstacle or face a relatively minor temporary issue or small setback and end up losing their valuable learning opportunity. They may have persisted for many years without interruption, but later, perhaps because of their own mindset, in fact, the external conditions were never interrupted at all. All of our various connections, no matter where we are, we should still be able to connect in the same way. This is something everyone should really learn well, truly. Today, we will continue with the Udāna Sūtra, specifically with some verses from the third chapter, the chapter on craving. Apart from the attainment of accomplishment, one remains bound by the Mara and follow aging and death, much like a calf that seeks its mother's milk, drawn by a natural sense of longing. This verse mainly explains that if one does not make the effort to cut off desire and craving, then neither true happiness nor genuine joy can be found in this world, nor any accomplishment can be attained. One will even be bound by Mara. In other words, if one is separated from the accomplishment and happiness achieved in the process of practice, or the happiness that comes from accomplishment, that is, the ultimate accomplishment of being completely free from all suffering, and the profound happiness of being truly free from all fear, temporary worldly happiness, or ultimate spiritual peace and eternal joy. Such a person is constantly bound by the strong ropes of Mara, always being tied up, unable to escape. This is because of the four great Maras, or the Mara of distraction. In fact, if we do not practice well, it is impossible to attain the happiness of accomplishment. If we do not attain the happiness of accomplishment, we will always be bound by various Maras of distraction, or by the powerful Maras of various kinds of mental and physical sufferings. What such a deeply bound person ultimately attains is not true genuine liberation, not real nirvana. They are inevitably destined to age and eventually die. With the natural process of aging comes inevitable suffering, and with death, as is often the case, comes fear. Therefore, such a person will never attain genuine, true freedom in their life, nor will they find lasting satisfaction or any sense of liberation in their lives. They will not attain freedom, liberation, or satisfaction. To use an analogy to explain this, it is like a calf, which is a young cow, for example, that is always seeking its own mother's warm, nourishing milk. In order to simply get the milk, it obediently follows its mother everywhere, always staying close and never wandering far. This behavior is a clear example of the attachment that arises from desire, showing how strong such bonds can be. In fact, our desires often have a similar flaw. The more we indulge them, the more we find ourselves chasing after what we want, rarely feeling satisfied. Nowadays, this is commonly referred to as addiction. For example, if you really like drinking coffee, once you're addicted, you start drinking it all the time. If you like watching movies, once you're addicted, you keep watching movies. If you really like playing mahjong, in fact, that's also an unhealthy addiction, so it's called being addicted. In traditional Buddhism, this particular kind of addiction is called intense desire or deep craving. This kind of attachment may seem very pleasant on the surface at first and doesn't appear to be a problem. But in reality, as mentioned earlier, it is a hidden demon, an invisible kind of demon. This powerful demon, in many different areas of our daily lives, constantly brings about deep fear and intense suffering. We are never truly at complete ease. As ordinary people or those who are spiritually ignorant, we have absolutely no idea that we are in fact being subtly controlled by it. It's understandable for a calf to follow its mother cow because it is already led by its own natural greed and desires. Some of us pursue fame and fortune, constantly running, always trying to make ourselves famous. Some people, after getting money, keep on running after more. This too is completely unavoidable. For example, no matter who we are, when we talk about gyavla, people like us, the gyavla, why do we often follow certain people around? It's just like a calf following its mother cow. There's nothing it can do about it. Because the calf is particularly fond of its mother's milk. It doesn't necessarily like its mother. Its main goal is simply the milk. As for us humans, maybe we have a bit more emotion involved. But generally speaking, the natural relationship between a mother cow and her young calf is just about getting some mutual benefit. So why does the calf like its mother so much? There is a reason for it. So in this world of ours, as long as you take a liking to someone, As long as you continuously develop strong greed and intense desire, then you'll never truly attain complete liberation. There's a popular book called The Game of Desire. There's also a widely available Chinese edition of it. It talks a lot about the various faults and shortcomings of desire. There's also a section in the middle of the text that discusses the practice of meditation. It talks about using mindfulness techniques to curb greed. The fundamental idea is that our intense greed and desire are actually just like fragile bubbles floating in the bright sunlight. When strong sunlight shines directly on a delicate bubble, the bubble immediately disappears completely. In the same way, after we carefully investigate from all angles and consider every detail and understand the true nature of desire or the essence of sensual pleasure, if we clearly see that it isn't actually real, then you won't have such intense cravings anymore. Today, I unexpectedly met a leader who told me that he is genuinely really indifferent to worldly fame and material profit. They're just fleeting clouds, meaningless, but in reality, I know this person too. He isn't as indifferent as he claims. He has also worked very hard in pursuit of fame and fortune, quite a lot, in fact. Actually, people, including ourselves, often speak very beautifully about these things. But to truly see desire as our enemy, as our most fundamental underlying problem, is actually very rare indeed. So, as I specifically mentioned earlier in the famous book, The Game of Desire, there is actually one primary main line in it. Freedom does not lie in satisfying desires, but in what? In liberation from desire. This line is actually quite famous. Many of us say, I've achieved financial freedom, or I've gained freedom in life, and so on. It sounds very good when we say it. But in reality, it's not about satisfying desires. If it were about satisfying desires, then, as some people mentioned earlier, even if you gain mountains of gold and silver, you still might not be satisfied, right? But if you can truly find liberation from overwhelming desire, then at that precise moment, you have already successfully attained a kind of lasting happiness. So here, it also specifically talks about those who are far removed from happiness and achievement, are always followed by sinister demons, lingering attachments, and greedy desires. Such people are always accompanied by aging and death, and will never attain nirvana in between. This is like a metaphor for many people in the world today who are especially eager and enthusiastic in pursuing their personal goals and ambitions. Within those goals, of course, as dedicated Buddhists and serious practitioners, we do indeed truly need to eventually attain complete spiritual liberation, even if your current understanding of liberation or your intellectual grasp of it isn't particularly deep. Perhaps much of it is only superficial, including those of us who are currently studying, contemplating, and actively practicing in Buddhist academy. Some people say maybe they're right. And I personally also share this view that in the past, indeed, quite a few people abandoned this life and then focused on the 5 great treatises and tantric practices, studied and practiced them with exceptional sincerity and deep profundity. But now, with the advent of the internet age, and in the overwhelming flood of the information explosion era, many people, on the contrary, are increasingly more focused on history and poetics, and on various worldly subjects, including linguistics, and are actively pursuing these areas even more. Of course, if you pursue things this way, it's true that a wise person can be knowledgeable in all things. On one hand, that's acceptable. But for those of us who seek liberation, our ultimate goal should not be to seek worldly knowledge just like ordinary people do. So what is the reason for this? Actually, for the most part, nowadays, including on the internet and in many other modern forms of communication, many people regularly talk about history, engage in conversations about linguistics, and discuss a wide variety of different types of worldly knowledge. They use all kinds of clever methods to advertise themselves. In this way, it seems as if this kind of knowledge is even more important than liberation. It's possible to get that impression. That's why I previously said that learning various languages and acquiring all kinds of knowledge is very important. But what I'm saying today is that it's not actually that important. Is there a contradiction here? No, there isn't. If we look at it as a whole, we should indeed study all kinds of knowledge in our lives. But for those of us who sincerely seek liberation, the ultimate spiritual goal should always be the most profound and truly meaningful one. Our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, compared to any other great philosopher, sometimes I may not be entirely precise. So scholars who understand philosophy are indeed different, because we all know the most famous figures from ancient Greece, the most renowned figures from Confucianism, the most prominent figures from other religions, the scriptures they left behind. When compared with the exoteric and esoteric scriptures left by the Buddha, everyone should be absolutely clear about the difference, without any confusion. In this situation, if we, like the Ganges River, choose to set aside the Buddha's teachings and instead seek other kinds of worldly similar knowledge, it is in fact somewhat irresponsible and even careless toward our own lives. Therefore, in our short lives, we should both understand worldly knowledge. But more importantly, if in this very life we truly engage in practice and genuinely study deeply profound teachings such as ancient prajna and ultimate emptiness, the restless human mind can indeed be gradually tamed. Originally, I was exactly like a completely wild and untamed horse. My mind was unmanageable and especially unruly. But in the following Udāna Sūtra, currently known as, it specifically uses the analogy of a fine horse and horse training to explain this. In fact, no matter how restless, energetic, or wild a horse is at first, after it has been patiently trained by a skilled horse trainer, it eventually becomes especially gentle, calm, and well-mannered. This transformation is the result of consistent training and guidance. In the same way, as long as we are capable, if we work with our own minds and cultivate and tame them according to the Buddha's teachings, we will definitely become truly excellent practitioners. Many great masters and eminent monks in the past were very mischievous and wild at the beginning, including those we have heard about, such as the stories of Ben Gungya and Lierao Langba. When Zhongdunpa was young, he wasn't so well behaved either. There are many such stories of people's spiritual journeys. Later on, they became great figures of their generation. So the most crucial thing is whether each person can truly tame their own restless and chaotic mind. If we don't successfully tame our wandering minds, we might ultimately end up completely wasting our brief and precious human lives. We might even chase after the fleeting and illusory things of the world, such as wealth, fame, and even things like the feeling of being pleased or happy when others say that you are handsome or good-looking, and you really start to believe that this is who you truly are. Every day, you just keep posting these kinds of photos. I'm not against anyone being good-looking or having a particularly pleasant voice. It's really not about that. Because if you aren't like that yourself, being jealous is completely useless. But as a beginner, as a young scholar at the beginning of your academic journey, if you get the direction wrong at the very start, you might end up with deep regrets in your later years. So we really should truly work on taming our own minds and not be led astray by our desires. Those who are able to cut off emotional attachment here departs from love and its objects, both existence and non-existence. Monks who subdue the three realms enter nirvana without remainder. Here it talks about those who are able to eliminate desire and attachment in this context. The so-called here actually refers to within the Buddha's teachings, where one can completely eradicate their own greed and desire. But among other non-Buddhist paths, they can basically only suppress their afflictions and desires, essentially not truly eliminating them. Beyond that, there's nothing they can do. Indeed, they lack the realization of selflessness and emptiness. They don't have effective methods to counteract these issues. So within this Dharma teaching, there are methods to cut off attachment. If one can sever attachment, they can be free from love and attachment, free from such clinging. What are the objects of attachment that one leaves behind? Existence and non-existence. if its existence, your object of focus, truly exists, such as a bottle or a pillar, or the people or animals you like, and so on. Actually, if everyone likes something, for example, some people like cars, some people like cats, and some people really like puppies, I see that even among practitioners, their individual preferences do actually differ. Some are fond of things that are illusory, things that don't really exist. Truly, there are certain dreams, or even their own reputation, that people hold on to. Like, can I become the richest person in the world in the future? Or, can I fly a plane someday? They keep fantasizing about things that are completely unrealistic. This is attachment to non-existent things, things that don't truly exist. So, if we can cut off attachment, what will we be free from? Attachment. Moreover, the objects of attachment can be existent or non-existent things. All of these worldly attachments can be completely let go of. Such bhikshu can eventually transcend the three binding realms. There was once a master of traditional Chinese studies who said that the so-called three realms are the future, the past, and the present. In the end, people online started criticizing him as well. Actually, the three realms are the realm of desire, the realm of form, and the formless realm. You could put it that way, though there are other ways to explain it too. In any case, such a bhikshu can subdue all the attachments and afflictions within the three realms, all forms of attachment and afflictions. Ultimately, one attains nirvana without remainder. As for nirvana without remainder, in reality, there are truly no afflictions left, and no physical body remains either. With nirvana with remainder, however, some aspects still remain present. For example, the physical body still remains. But with nirvana without remainder, it's like a tree that has been completely uprooted from the very foundation. At the root, nothing remains. This is called nirvana without remainder. So in this world we live in, by relying on the teachings of the Buddha, one will not develop attachment or clinging to any phenomena whatsoever. Moreover, such a bhikshu transcends the three realms and ultimately, in the end, attains this nirvana without remainder. This is also considered to be very important. Therefore, it is also stated in the Avatamsaka Sutra, with the rain of the Buddha's liberating nectar, all sentient beings' craving are extinguished. As for this craving, in our chapter on craving, we also discuss craving. In fact, it is also present in the Avatamsaka Sutra. By wholeheartedly relying on the gentle rain of the Buddha's all-encompassing and profoundly liberating nectar, it is possible to eliminate within the continuum of sentient beings all of these intense and burning cravings. They can all be completely cut off. Therefore, if we can genuinely make a sincere effort to follow the teachings of the Buddha, they can indeed be cut off. In this respect, there is also this wonderful opportunity. Moreover, the Sutra of Mindfulness of the True Dharma also teaches us that if a person is able to sever the river of craving, one will escape the relentless current of birth and death. If one can cut off the river of craving, if one can sever the river of craving, one will escape the current of birth and death. If we cut off the river of love, nowadays many people say, I have already fallen into the river of love, sunk in the mud of affection. There are all kinds of ways of saying this. So if we can somehow manage to sever the powerful river of love, then in the future we will no longer drift endlessly in samsara, constantly wandering without direction, constantly sinking into despair, constantly experiencing profound suffering. It's important to understand that all of this suffering can be completely cut off. So the love mentioned here, what we often refer to in the world is what's known as self-serving love. And it's a concept that Buddhism has also discussed before. Actually, while altruistic love can be referred to as love in a general sense, a more precise term for it is compassion. This involves having a deep love for all sentient beings. Japanese entrepreneur Kazuo Inamori. He was once a very famous and well-known entrepreneur. Initially, as an entrepreneur, his primary motivation was for his own personal gain. He founded a variety of businesses and was involved in all sorts of ventures. But later on, things didn't seem to go very ideally. Afterwards, when it came to the overall management and direction of his business, whether it was his long-term strategic vision or his fundamental ultimate goal, he made a significant shift in his focus to ensure it would benefit all of society. Then he put forward the idea of respect heaven and love people. He sought to maintain a profound reverence for the heavens and all things existing in the natural world, and to hold a deep and compassionate love for all sentient beings and for humanity as a whole. Following these events, his commercial enterprises across the world experienced a period of unprecedented growth, becoming remarkably successful. Therefore, in subsequent years, among the elite Fortune 500 corporations, some of the notable stories from his life have been recounted on previous occasions as well. In the end, it was also through this philosophy that he gradually, over time, ordained as a monk in his later years. So, in this world, the greatest love is truly the love of the Buddha. This particular kind of love can be described as one that truly embraces all sentient beings. But this form of love, as was mentioned earlier, is something that is indeed exceptionally rare to find in this world. We practice the four dharmas of Shramana and are also influenced by various. Furthermore, it's not just the individuals we've talked about. Many others have also experienced unfair treatment and harsh criticism at the hands of certain media organizations. This phenomenon has been in existence for a very long time, dating back to antiquity. However, the Buddha is not. The Buddha taught that the real enemy is not other people, but one's own internal afflictions, such as troubles and hatred. Therefore, the enemy is not the sentient beings who have these troubles. This teaching is from the 400 stanzas on the middle way. So sometimes I find that I am a little bit, for example, this is the case in the media. If Buddhism does even one little thing, they constantly keep talking about it over and over again. But on the other hand, if something else negative happens, it just quickly disappears from public view entirely. Honestly, it's quite a bit unpleasant. But sometimes I think, how did the Buddha practice patience back then? In the end, all the demons and their retinues, what kind of serious consequences did they ultimately face? The answer to this is something that is already quite clear to everyone. So in this current and degenerate age, you find that with many people who are acting purely for their own various interests, there's really not much that can be done about it. For example, I remember some time ago, it was probably about 6 months back, someone went out of their way to deliberately write all sorts of different things to me, accusing me of breaking the law in various ways. At that particular point in time, many leaders also started to view me in a completely different light. But as an ordinary person, I genuinely did feel, for absolutely no reason at all, why are they treating me like this? But as it happened, later on, after 6 or 7 months, I had a conversation with him, and he basically admitted it himself. Since he admitted it, I also said, we shouldn't hold grudges or seek revenge against each other over such a trivial matter. There is absolutely no need for tit-for-tat retaliation to occur between us. At the very least, people who are privileged to wear these robes would certainly not do that. But in reality, what is it that we should actually do? I also took the opportunity to give him some explanations. So sometimes, it's not that we've cultivated patience or forbearance so well, but sometimes, for one reason or another, whether it's because of this identity, or relying on the teachings our teachers have given us, or alternatively, the selfless merits of bodhicitta, we can't help but reflect on these things a little. And once we reflect, it seems that a lot of afflictions and anger naturally subside. Although they're not completely eradicated, their power isn't quite as strong for the time being. Therefore, this is something we must consider and account for in our future practice. We really do need to rely on the Buddha's nectar-like teachings, as they are truly helpful in eliminating all kinds of afflictions from our mental continuum. They are extremely beneficial.
Deep Guruva, Deim Yandem Pengerter, Sala Charva Vapavjin. Riva. Sala Charva Vapavjins.
What does this mean? In this world, it is very difficult to let go. We are all enslaved by craving for women, and relying on this only serves to increase our sorrow, much like rain falling on grass. Here it is said that in this world, it is very difficult to abandon afflictions rooted in attachment and desire. This mainly refers to non-Buddhists. This refers to those who, although they have some restraint over their attachments, much like the naked ascetics we have previously mentioned and some other non-Buddhist practitioners, they nevertheless still possess attachment, anger, and ignorance toward worldly things. In some sects, they try to abandon these things, but it's very difficult for them because they lack methods to counteract these afflictions. They don't have Mahayana's great compassion or its view of emptiness, nor the non-dual pure view of Vajrayana and similar teachings. None of these are present for them. Therefore, if we become enslaved by the powerful forces of craving and attachment to the female form or any other similar objects of worldly desire, then your own happiness is significantly undermined. And of course, woman is used here simply as a representative example. It could also refer to men or to fame, wealth, beauty, and so on. All of these are included as well. For example, the women we dearly love or the great wealth and fame we find ourselves so attached to. These are the very things that can ultimately enslave us. It's like being treated as a slave, where you are perpetually prevented from attaining your own true freedom. And if we continue to rely on these very things, the deep-seated sorrow and the profound suffering that we feel in our hearts will only continue to increase, growing more and more, because you are unable to let go of your desires and the objects of your attachment. These struggles can often bind you even tighter, and in this way, the sorrow you feel will only continue to grow more profound. For example, in our everyday lives, it is generally understood that this is not only a common social convention, but also an established tradition. Take starting a family or getting married, for instance. For a great many people, this is often perceived as the most wonderful beginning. However, the unfortunate reality is that from that very moment onward, it often marks the true beginning of a long and difficult period of suffering. Why is that then? Because you no longer have the same freedom you once enjoyed. Many people have analyzed this and said that before you start a family, you might post in WeChat groups. This often means sharing a constant stream of photos that highlight your free and easy lifestyle, showcasing beautiful surroundings from your travels and a vibrant social life. But everything changes once you decide to start a family. All those wonderful things seem to disappear without a trace. This is also a very common saying within worldly or secular traditions. However, it is worth noting that it doesn't always precisely match our own actual experience. In a certain story, it is said that on one occasion, while the Buddha was staying in a quiet and secluded place for retreat, he observed a particular type of grass called biruna. This grass, which grew during the summer months, was especially lush and vigorous. Taking this as a teaching opportunity, the Buddha then spoke to a monk who was known to be very attached and greedy, and recited the following verse. Because for people with an especially strong attachment to worldly things, this was the most effective method to teach them. Actually, around Larunga these days, in a great many places, the grass is proving to be particularly lush this year, growing much more thickly than has been observed in any of the preceding years. Maybe it's just because there are noticeably fewer people and fewer yaks around these days, but it seems particularly tall. Most of the grass is growing especially tall. Sometimes when I go out in the morning, I often wonder why the grass appears to be exactly like this, but perhaps it's because it's been raining recently. That could indeed be the reason. So at that particular time, the Buddha saw all of these things. And as mentioned earlier, the biruna grass was growing very tall. The more it rained, the taller it grew, and that is the fundamental reason why this specific analogy was used. So, as I have just mentioned previously, for the majority of grasses, when it rains, some of them simply don't grow all that tall. However, this particular grass is quite special due to its unique growth pattern. The more it rains, the taller and more abundant it becomes. For this reason, in our world, this characteristic was often used as a metaphor for monks, helping them to understand and counteract worldly desire. This is especially true when it comes to attraction to women. Now, regarding monastics of the opposite sex, the situation can also be explained in a different way. Actually, since ancient times, fundamentally, the two primary sources of our ever-increasing desire have consistently been the allure of beauty and the satisfaction of food. Didn't the great philosopher Mencius once say, "Food and sex are human nature"? Food refers to eating and sex refers to physical attraction. What this means is that, according to Mencius, though it seems it wasn't actually Mencius who said it, but rather it's written in the book Mencius. Gaozi should have said it. Some say Confucius said this, but it probably wasn't him. There's a saying sometimes attributed to Confucius, though I'm not entirely sure, as I don't recall seeing it in the Analects or similar classical texts. The essential point is that, as human beings, we have a natural appetite for food and an appreciation for beauty. This is a fundamental part of our nature, and is very difficult to give up. In the past, Warren Buffett famously said that in this world we all live in, some men, those who are ultimately unsuccessful, are naturally going to be weeded out. For this to happen, God arranges powerful temptations like beautiful women and delicious food. This is because there is a specific group of men who are individuals that have become completely obsessed with their attraction to women, so they accomplish nothing in their careers. God in his own time weeds out all of these people. And then there's another group who are especially fond of eating and drinking. These people are also rather vulgar. In the end, God weeds out both of these particular groups, something along those lines. I think it was Buffett, the American stock market guru, the person who mentioned this, perhaps in a public speech or another setting, framed the issue in this way. However, it's very possible that this was because at that particular point in time, the prevailing Western views on women, there is what could be described as a slight patriarchal attitude. Well, as a matter of fact, if the less successful people are to be eliminated, perhaps God has a very special gift intended for women. The unsuccessful part is eliminated, and it is also possible that he transforms into these two different types of people. In any case, no matter what, from a historical perspective, it is indeed true that human beings are more likely to be brought to ruin by their own greed. For example, back in the Tang dynasty, a monk named Bianji was widely considered Tang Xuanzang's most capable disciple. He began his monastic life at the young age of 15 and was known for his exceptional intelligence, including the great Tang records on the western regions. At that time, he assisted Tang Xuanzang with the writing. Furthermore, his personal writing skills were also quite excellent. He was a close follower who always accompanied the master Xuanzang. His own academic achievements and scholarship were also considered to be remarkably outstanding. However, his life took a significant turn later on because of his involvement with the emperor's daughter at the time, who was Princess Gaoyang, the daughter of Emperor Taizong. She developed a strong desire for him, and they were both mutually attracted to one another. Afterwards, the situation was complicated because Gaoyang herself was already married and had a family. Later, when Emperor Taizong eventually discovered this affair, he was extremely angry. He immediately ordered Bianji's execution by waist chopping, a cruel form of capital punishment from that era. This method stands in stark contrast to contemporary executions. In the modern age, for those sentenced to death, while beheading was once common, many places now use more humane procedures, such as painless bullets. But back in those days, they would really cut a person in two at the waist. It was extremely painful, and at the same time, more than a dozen others were also ultimately sentenced to death. Therefore, much later on, a great number of historians came to believe that Bianji, who was so incredibly famous during that particular period, in the end, among all of those many people involved, he was the one who received the death penalty from Emperor Taizong. This particular method of execution was considered to be exceptionally cruel. Therefore, for this very reason, despite the fact that he was known to be a genuinely good and highly respected monk during that period, he ultimately failed to overcome his own afflictions, which ultimately led to such consequences. So, regarding this concept of greed, it is a fact that whether a person is controlled by their desires for women or by their desires for men, the more that individual is consumed by this insatiable desire, the more their personal suffering will inevitably increase. In the end, this suffering only continues to multiply, and after it multiplies, it then becomes truly impossible to find any lasting happiness or contentment. So nowadays there's a saying, there was once a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. I think I have talked about the reasons why, in today's world, capitalists, in order to effectively numb a vast number of people, they deliberately allow our hearts and minds to be tempted by a constant stream of all kinds of meaningless, fragmented culture, and as a result, we inevitably end up becoming deeply addicted to it. In Amusing Ourselves to Death, it says, what ultimately ruins us is not necessarily what we hate. For each of us, What might destroy you in the long run is not the things you hate, but rather it is almost always the very things that we love. Actually, it's the same for us monastics. Many Buddhists are like this too. And so are ordinary people in the world. Whether you're a leader, an entrepreneur, or someone with any other identity, on the surface it seems that this is something I really like, something good. But you don't realize the cause of your life's ruin is this. If from the start it's something you really hate, something you really dislike, something you can't stand, maybe it isn't necessarily harmful to you. For example, even your enemies, or those you strongly oppose. But for us as human beings, it's very often the things that we are especially fond of, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, looking at your phone. You really enjoy looking at your phone because the dopamine stimulation is there. The more you look, the more you like it, and it just keeps increasing. In this case, what actually ruins you isn't always the person who harms you, slanders you daily, or talks about you constantly, but rather the more you like something, the more you get addicted to it. And then Mara, the demon king, takes immense delight, compelling you to try every conceivable way to keep going deeper and deeper into it. And as a result, our own minds are ultimately destroyed by it. So here it is said that it is very difficult for people in the world to let go of many worldly desires and cravings, which can keep us trapped in them with absolutely no way out. Especially in today's world, the very things that we find ourselves liking, many of them are just vulgar culture. So what is vulgar culture? It's the kind of thing that has no real value, no real substance. The more you watch these things, the more you want to keep watching. But when it comes to things that are deep, substantial, truly meaningful, or incredibly valuable, it always seems like there is a huge mountain standing between us and them, almost as if there's an entire mountain blocking the way. You just can't get into them. So if we really were to read the Prajnaparamita Sutra all day long, just as we look at our phones, maybe we would actually become enlightened, but we just don't want to. Nowadays, many people say they're not interested in the Prajnaparamita Sutra or the ornament of clear realization. They just aren't interested. Some people even stay up all night online, and then when they come to class the next day, they're still half awake and half asleep, feeling totally groggy. Even though they have to check in with a fingerprint and have no choice but to attend, their attitude when they come is really bad. When the teacher is lecturing, they're basically daydreaming like they're flying on a plane or riding a ship. The ship part is just something I made up. I've never heard of that. But you can take a plane or a ship. So have you ever wondered why we call it taking a plane?
What
is hard to give up in this world? The craving for women can be given up. Relying on that, one is free from sorrow, like a lotus unstained by water. What is it that's so hard to give up in this world? It is the craving for women and other worldly attachments. If you are able to give these things up, as I've just mentioned, if you can let go of these desires, then all kinds of worries, afflictions, and pains that come from them, all of these will be left behind. Even if you are among these people, it's like the leaf of a lotus flower. No matter how many drops of water fall on it, they simply will not seep in. It will not be tainted by them in any way. It's as simple as that. So indeed, in this world, especially for non-Buddhists, it's very hard to give up these things, including the love for the opposite sex or the attachment to wealth. These are very difficult to let go of. The context for this story is explained with very little detail in some commentaries, so for a more complete understanding, it's necessary for us to elaborate on it ourselves. In fact, the main source of this story originates from the historical time of the Buddha in India, where there lived a woman by the name of Amrapali. Amrapali was extremely beautiful, and she captivated a great number of men. Later, she eventually developed a strong sense of arrogance herself, and she thought, having heard that the Buddha was very great, she understood that in her presence it was highly unlikely that he would ever be able to surpass her. Therefore, she set her sights on a much greater challenge, aspiring to conquer the Buddha himself. Then the Buddha spoke to her about certain things. This includes fundamental truths. For example, that all forms of beauty will eventually grow old, and that our worldly desires will ultimately lead to suffering, and other similar concepts. The Buddha explained these principles. Amrapali, in fact, had very good roots of virtue, and she immediately became awakened. A short time later, she went on to attain the state of arhatship. So it is said that in this world, although some people find themselves completely captivated by the allure of the opposite sex, making them unable to stand firm in their convictions as their personal resolve eventually collapses, they can only accept and go along with this new reality. This is not just a story. Nowadays, many people in our real life experience this very thing. Were especially fond of studying and listening to teachings in their early years, kept pure precepts and were excellent in many aspects. But when they reach the latter part of their lives, their personal circumstances can frequently change into something completely different. However, some people are not tainted by these external things. I remember there was something quite similar to this in a movie I saw before, about when the famous monk Xuanzang was traveling on his great journey to the West to obtain the sacred scriptures. In the film, he first passed through a place in the Xinjiang region called Yiwu, a location that was already widely known for its sweet grapes. It used to be a country of its own. At that time, the king of that country was especially fond of Xuanzang when he saw him. According to the content of the film, that king was a Buddhist with faith. He always wanted to keep Xuanzang there. He tried all kinds of ways to tempt him into staying. First, he pleaded with him, saying, stay in my country and don't go anywhere else. He then promised, if you stay here, I can give you many important positions of power. You can be my national teacher and so on. But Xuanzang remained unwavering and again refused the king's offer. The king then tried a different tactic, tempting the monk with beautiful women from the royal palace. But still, Xuanzang could not be persuaded to stay. Eventually, Xuanzang began a hunger strike. The king had no choice. In the end, he let Xuanzang teach the Dharma for a month. Subsequently, that king proved to be of great assistance for Xuanzang. He made sure to keep sending people to escort Xuanzang on his long journey all the way to India. Xuanzang said at the time, even if I die, I will not stay here. I must first go to fetch the scriptures. After I have obtained the scriptures, I will come back. If I return, I can teach you. Later, when Xuanzang returned, he fulfilled his promise and taught the Dharma to the king. And it is true that there was indeed such an event. So back then, including some of Xuanzang's biographical accounts, if we look at the biographies, indeed every great person, and even ordinary practitioners like us, in our own life experiences, whether it's in terms of study and contemplation or in upholding precepts, we all face temptations from the world. But some people are able to get through all of this with remarkable strength, while others, when faced with such adverse conditions, simply can't manage. It's just like many vast herds of cattle in Africa today, which have to migrate seasonally every single year. During the long and dangerous migration, some of them make it through relatively smoothly, while others are eaten by various fish in the river, thus becoming a part of the ongoing cycle of life in their natural habitat. In fact, when we think about it, our lives in this world are, in certain ways, somewhat similar to the migration of animals. A considerable number of people encounter all kinds of adverse conditions along the way and are unable to get through them. And moreover, some of the obstacles that appear before you seem especially appealing and likable, but only after falling into the jaws of tigers and wolves do you realize it. By then, it's already too late to do anything about it. According to the teachings of many great masters, when these adverse conditions become extremely severe, one still needs courage and resilience. Now I have encountered obstacles, I should be careful. For example, during times of war or famine, many practitioners kept their spiritual aspirations. On the contrary, when things are going well and life is happy, when one is in possession of money, status and wealth at such times, it's actually in reality. Today, two Khenpos came to see me. They said, both of us have already been practicing. One has been studying and contemplating for 19 years, and the other for 21 years. Both have obtained the Khenpo degree. They hope to join our translation class. I said, the translation class is indeed not within my authority. That is under the jurisdiction of the Academic Affairs Office of the Institute. If they won't add anyone, there's nothing I can do either. They said that. Then do you think that in the future, by studying languages or otherwise, we can spread the Dharma and benefit sentient beings? I said, honestly, I can't say for sure. Linguistics is good, but it also has downsides. Maybe after all these years of study and contemplation, if you start learning different languages now, you might regret it in your later years. Or perhaps you could benefit many sentient beings. Then they said, could you give the two of us some guidance and tell us how we should proceed in the future? I said that perhaps the best thing is to ask those Khenpos who used to teach you for more than 20 years. They should be able to give you some helpful guidance about your future. Otherwise, I'm actually a stranger to you as well. I really can't say much. Personally, I have had Dharma connections in the past. Whatever these teachers have said, I basically repeat it in the same way. At the very least, one should have a unique karmic connection and causes and conditions. That's what I told them. There was nothing more I could do. But indeed, sometimes when we study languages, for a practitioner or a monastic, by the time they reach old age, they might think, oh, this language has actually been very beneficial for me. It can help many sentient beings. I can maintain my own if I can truly not abandon my path, not disturb others' minds. But sometimes it seems I haven't even managed to spread the Dharma and benefit beings. On the contrary, I myself, who was originally a content, low desire and very pure practitioner, even that has completely disappeared. It's a bit of a pity. Maybe this could happen, but this is also hard to say for sure. Everyone is ultimately governed by karma in their lives in every aspect, and many things are not within our freedom. It's not just as I imagine it to be. I hope we can be like lotuses unstained by water, remaining in this world, staying far from all adverse conditions and proceeding smoothly, so that in this brief life we can truly do something meaningful. Therefore, to all who have come here, I would like to offer a warm welcome and say, may you be happy. Ru is the character Ru, that means you. Regarding the earlier point, it is better to change an to ru, so making this adjustment will help keep our message clear. May you be happy. Just as one pulls out Usura grass, uproot deep attachment completely. What this profound meaning is, because we absolutely need to cut off all attachment, and to successfully do so, among countless diverse sentient beings throughout the world, there are all kinds of different people. Some are suitable vessels for the Dharma, while others are not suitable vessels. But when it comes to cutting off attachment, at that precise time, the compassionate Buddha said that for this reason, those of you who are truly connected and are genuinely suitable vessels, please come directly to me. With the powerful method of cutting off attachment just mentioned, I will teach it to you, wishing that you may attain happiness. The happiness referred to here is permanent liberation. Because temporary happiness, perhaps each of us can obtain it. For example, enjoying more delicious food or wearing more stylish clothing. These are all possible. But this is not true happiness. What this means is, for all those who have truly come to me and are suitable vessels, I sincerely hope that each and every one of you can eventually attain the true happiness of permanent liberation. Now, this special kind of ultimate happiness is like a particular type of grass in the world called Ushina. Earlier, we talked about Biruna. Perhaps the visible upper part is actually Biruna, and directly below is its deep root system. It's just exactly like the valuable cordyceps we see today. Cordyceps, that's right, isn't it? I often say it wrong. Cordyceps, yes, certainly. It's just like that, you know, the upper part is called Biruna and the lower part seems to be known as Ushina. That's simply how it is. Actually, it's a type of poisonous grass, so you should be careful. If you uproot this grass, make sure to pull it out completely by the roots. Its roots are all thoroughly dug up with a hoe, with, you know, the kind of hoe that people commonly use nowadays to dig for cordyceps, just like how we used to dig for white mushrooms in the past. So I've never actually dug for cordyceps myself. I once talked a bit about cordyceps, and many people online talked about me then. I said cordyceps, since it's so hyped by businesses now, might not actually be all that great. Then many people talked to me about it. They said that nowadays, cordyceps is the only really good thing. How could you say that? So later I had to say, cordyceps is great, especially good for health. Then I specifically looked up the benefits of cordyceps online. Honestly, at the time, I was just being casual about it. It was in a school or something like that. Back when we herded cattle, there were many in the mountains. Some said they ate it, but it didn't feel like anything special. Later, cordyceps was touted as something amazing. So after we ate it, we also started to feel something. So people can change with their environment, with education, and with different ideas and beliefs. So digging for cordyceps and digging for white mushrooms, it's like using those small hoes, using those tools to dig or extract things out, just the same. Carefully digging out the cordyceps from the ground. Once it is completely excavated, it will never grow back. So we should cut off this love, this deep craving. We really need to cut it off at its very root. But if you truly want to cut it off at the root, you have to realize the non-self of persons or phenomena, or contemplate impurity, of course. The contemplation of impurity, according to the perspective of the Entering the Middle Way treatise, is not the ultimate method. It's actually a mistaken view, right? How is it actually described? It's just a simple method commonly used in the traditional Hinayana for basic meditative practice sessions. It's definitely not the ultimate final approach. So when it comes to our attachment and craving, completely eliminating it at the very root is absolutely the best approach. Otherwise, as long as we still have this deep attachment, we will never truly attain complete liberation. Even in the secular world, there are people who are not greedy for desires. In the past, in the Zhuozhuan, you may have read it. We also studied it before, back when we were in school. There's a metaphor in the Zhuozhuan that I remember. There was a man who was especially fond of a beautiful piece of jade, and he was preparing to give this jade to someone else. Sometimes, even nowadays, we might try to bribe some officials in a similar way, thinking that they might like it. But this person refused to accept it. He was asked, well, why won't you accept it? He replied, what I value most is truly not being greedy. What you value most is the jade. If I accept it, then neither of us will have our treasure anymore. Because I consider my lack of greed to be my treasure, and you consider this jade to be your treasure. If I accept it, then you will no longer have your jade, which is a pity. And I will also lose my treasure of not being greedy. So it's better for each of us to keep our own treasures. So this particular type of love, which we might initially believe is a good thing, is actually a kind of mental defilement. If a wise person in the world takes not being greedy as a fundamental standard for their entire life, it will certainly bring great benefit and tremendous help to their whole life. So in our complex modern world too, those truly wise people who are not overly greedy at the very least always live a very pure and deeply peaceful life. Everything they do goes very smoothly and quite successfully indeed. So in our world today, as we look around us, there is also actually some explanation for this. Those who are accompanied by craving and attachment will wander for a long time, but if craving is completely eliminated, there will be neither worry nor fear. We talked about this earlier. This craving and desire are very troublesome. If you allow them to accompany you everywhere you go, then you will wander in samsara for a long time. One moment you may become a human, the next you become a cow, and then you become a being in hell. All of this is caused by this kind of craving and attachment. In the end, you really never get the chance to attain liberation. Therefore, we should definitely find a practical way to completely cut off this deep craving entirely. If you can successfully eliminate this craving, then there will be no suffering in this world, no present pain, and no future fear. This was something the Buddha once said in a particular place, that he saw every sentient being, and not a single one was free from the temptation of craving and attachment. In other words, all sentient beings everywhere are constantly harmed by deep craving and strong attachment daily. That is why these two verses were specifically spoken. The following verse and these two verses are sometimes explained in this way as well. Some people say that the monks were gathered together in a certain place. They observed that people in the world, meaning ordinary men and women living their daily lives, are almost always bound and controlled by craving and desire. And so in this world, sometimes they are reborn as gods, sometimes as humans, and sometimes even as other various sentient beings. They are never able to attain liberation from the cycle of samsara, and suffering can never be completely ended. This is also one explanation. It seems that there are several different interpretations found in the various commentaries. There is also another account which states that there was a person who remained in his mother's womb for a total of 60 years, and when he was finally born, his hair was already white and his face was full of wrinkles, and his face was covered with many dark, noticeable age spots all over his face. Because the Buddha spoke about this case, I wonder why the Buddha would address such a person, someone who is neither old nor young. Actually, this kind of story, you might also know, in Han region, Laozi was also said to have stayed in his mother's womb for 72 years, according to some accounts, and 81 years, according to others. Whenever he was born, he was in fact already considered to be a very old man. Some historical records do indeed describe it this way, though there are also different versions in other historical accounts. But regardless, in reality, so-called love, or what we often refer to as so-called desire, is actually something that is very serious and significant. As practitioners, we should really try our best to cut off or at least significantly reduce it. This is very important. For example, in the Avatamsaka Sutra, it also says, you should cut off the net of love. You should tear apart the net of views. It uses the metaphor of a net for all of these. As practitioners, we should break free from the net of love. Otherwise, you will never be truly free. You should break it open, you should sever it, this net of wrong and evil views. You should save beings from the net of suffering and form the net of aspiration. You should have this powerful, compassionate net of saving others from suffering. In other words, you should rescue those who are in distress and who are in need of assistance. And also, you should make such aspirations as well. In fact, you should fulfill such aspirations. It's as if, just like in our current study of poetry, there is a special rhetorical device, and the key word is, so in the Avatamsaka Sutra as well, the latter part is all about nets, 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 nets. There are nets of attachment, nets of views, nets of suffering, and nets of aspiration. This also exists in Chinese Buddhism, but I once checked the Tibetan texts, and at that time I couldn't find anything particularly suitable. If we use the metaphor of a net to describe it, sometimes it's quite interesting. What it means is, if we can sever the net of attachment or uproot the root of attachment, then indeed such a person will have no worries now, and will not in fact experience fear in the future either at all. Ben Gongjia said, if in the past, when I was back in the world, I used to carry several knives at my waist, but now I have none, I'm completely unarmed, and I'm still doing just fine. Wasn't that what he said at the time? So I think that actually many monastics, if they are truly good monastics, as people say, they might be free from worries and troubles. As for some worldly practitioners, although they may not necessarily be able to reach such a state of ease, many of them can still see through things, accept things, and let go. So they are also free from worries and troubles. But for those who are greedy and attached in their hearts, their lives are always filled with deep anxiety and constant unease. They are constantly troubled and restless, afraid one moment, anxious the very next. Take a careful look at how many people are actively trading stocks nowadays. Many stock traders can't even sleep peacefully at night. If the stock market crashes suddenly, what will they do? They become extremely, extremely anxious. When the market goes up, they're thrilled. Wow, I made so much money today. But then all of a sudden things go bad again and so on. They are constantly worried about their own gains and losses, extremely anxious. This is also a very distressing way to live. Let me talk a bit more about this. Again and again, beings are born again and again. They enter the mother's womb. With changes in status and transformations, sentient beings constantly come and go. We sentient beings, all indeed in the cycle of samsara, enter it over and over, time and again. Because they, in fact, have this karma, with karma it keeps arising continuously. This mainly explains the truth of the origin of suffering. And so, again and again, they enter the mother's womb. Time after time, they enter again. Mainly for birth, it means entering the mother's womb. If it's egg-born, moisture-born, or spontaneously born, for example, it doesn't necessarily involve a mother's womb. The mother's womb is just symbolic. Again and again, beings are continuously generated in the cycle of samsara. And in the process of being generated, there are changes in status and transformations. Status change. When first entering the mother's womb, one needs to be born. So this is also very painful. And if you were originally a celestial being, but now, upon entering the mother's womb, you become a human or an animal, your position has changed as well. This is a kind of suffering of birth. Then as for transformation, after your body is fully formed, you may begin to experience illness, aging, and death. Actually, these changes in status and transformations refer, in the commentaries, to the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So sentient beings come and go, never having even a moment's rest, truly. Driven by their karma from past lives to this present life, from this life to the next, and then reborn again into yet another life. In this way, endlessly cycling, drifting from one existence to another, constantly experiencing suffering within samsara. So, samsara is genuinely and indeed terrifying. If we understand past and future lives as well as causes and effects, then such people are truly living meaningful lives. Some time ago, there was a respected Khenpo who was unexpectedly attacked by a group of approximately 500 masters or so. As for this particular Khenpo, he said, "Anyone who claims that past and future lives do not exist, come and debate with me face to face. I firmly believe this with absolute conviction. No one will be able to defeat me." Later, after some time had passed, things basically calmed down. Now, if others analyze the situation, they say that past and future lives should indeed exist. This wise Dharma teacher, it certainly seems that the principles he spoke about were quite meaningful and deeply enlightening. And as for his opponents in the debate, later on, I also heard that some of them were almost complaining tearfully. He said, "At first, there were 500 people in my group. Everyone said my viewpoint was correct. But now I have to ask, at this point, why have so many of you left? Indeed, if past and future lives did not exist, actually, as Buddhists, it might be hard for us to say. But if we do say it, we might face criticism in the future ourselves. However, some people say he doesn't actually believe that past and future lives don't exist. It's just that he wanted to make everyone perhaps have some doubts, maybe, and to raise the purpose of developing wisdom. As for the recent period in particular, I haven't participated in any of these discussions, but others have been discussing it for a while. Actually, this issue of past and future lives was also briefly mentioned here. We've discussed this before. For example, in World War II, there was a 3-year-old child and an Indian girl who remembered her past life. She also found her future incarnation herself, including myself in the past. Dr. Tucker and his team have also interviewed some people like this. In fact, these people don't have religious beliefs. But regarding the existence of past and future lives, there are still some different theories and viewpoints, including Master Yingguang, as well as the preceptor of his own preceptor, also talked about his own personal experience, that there is indeed the existence of past and future lives. He explained that there was a certain person whose mother had unfortunately died, and after she died one day at noon, she suddenly appeared in a dream to her beloved child, saying, "I am now at a certain place with a certain person. They started to kill me and I turned into a pig. You must come save me right away." After this person woke up, he hurried to the place he recognized from the dream. But when he finally arrived, the pig had already died there, lying in a pool of blood. After the pig died, he was extremely heartbroken, because it was his very own mother. Then he started rolling on the ground there, and many people wondered why he was acting like that. Later he said he was completely certain that was his mother. Anyway, he said, "That was my mother. You can investigate it yourselves." I have a vague impression of it. He insisted that Pig was my mother, but there was nothing he could do since it was already too late. He spent his life feeling guilty about it. After that, he became a vegetarian and became a monk. This is something that happened to him personally. Some people experience things like this in their current lives. So the existence of reincarnation, there are countless cases of past and future lives. For example, in Tibet, basically 99.99999% of people should acknowledge the existence of past and future lives. There are also 0.0000012% of young people who might have doubts about it. This even includes some monks among them. So no matter what, when it comes to these matters, everyone should still practice with right understanding and right mindfulness. Everything else is not a problem. All right, that's all for today.
Kirgana jirano chupan chupun zonen droa
Bandangara Badna Sūtra Bandangara Badna Sūtra Bandangara Badna Sūtra